Hello and welcome to our third Mini Movie Monday. Today we're going to be talking about your back and some yoga poses that are really great for keeping the back healthy and happy. First, I want to talk to you a few things about your spine. So our spine is this wonderful stacking of bones that runs from the base of our skull all the way down to our tailbone. And our spine is meant to support the framework of our body. It's part of what we call our axial skeleton. In the spine, we have four natural occurring curves. We have the cervical spine, which starts at the base of our skull and goes to about the bottom of our neck, and that curves inward so that the curve is facing backwards, so it looks like a backward C if you're looking at yourself from the side. And then we have the thoracic spine, which is what's attached to each of our ribs, which curves outward or looks like a normal shaped C if you're looking at the body from the side. And then it reverses again to the backward C for our lumbar spine or our low back, which is where a lot of people tend to feel that they have tightness and pain throughout the day. And then finally you have your fourth curve, which is in your sacrococcygeal spine, which is the part that attaches to your pelvis and creates your tailbone. And it again reverses the opposite direction and faces the same way as your thoracic spine. Our four spinal curves are very important to understand because when each of the portions of the spine is curved the way that it's supposed to be, that is what we call a neutral spine position. What does a neutral spine position look like? Well, if I'm looking at somebody from the side, especially in a kneeling position, it would be that their ear, their shoulder, their hip, and their knee would be in alignment. This is a more typical American posture, or this right here, because a lot of times we sit at our desk, so we curve over and get that hunchback position or an excessive thoracic spinal curve, or sometimes it's called a kyphosis. Or this one right here, where we have very weak abdominal muscles and very tight glute muscles, it can be called lower cross syndrome or an excessive lordosis. We see this a lot, especially in pregnant women. So the four areas of the spine should be in what we call a neutral alignment, not a straight spine, because like I said, the spine is meant to be naturally curved. So the spine is meant to move into what we call spinal flexion, which is basically bringing the ribs to the hips, much like if you were in a supine position and doing a crunch. Very different than a sit-up, because a sit-up is hip flexion. Opposite of flexion, extension, and then even into hyperextension, which allows us to do some back bends in yoga. It also works into lateral flexion, which means moving side to side. And then our spine also likes to rotate. And the spine can rotate in one of two ways. It can rotate independently of the pelvis if the hips are facing forward, but this can cause some shearing forces at that sacral level where the sacrum and the pelvis will start to split from each other a little bit. Or you can rotate with the pelvis, but this can cause more shearing forces in the knee. I've been working on a few yoga poses for my back of late because back in June when I started to have my knee issue on my right knee, I started to feel pain in the back of my right hip and then over into my left lower or lumbar spine area. Most of the pain was caused when I would do lateral flexion over to the right. And so the first thing that I did was rest to make sure that I wasn't actually injured. And then I spoke with a few people about it, and basically everybody told me that I had some severe muscle tightness. How did I work this out? Well, I started moving my spine in all directions, and I used several different yoga poses in order to do that. The first yoga pose that I used was a seated bent reed pose. And the reason I did it seated instead of standing was to decrease the amount of work that my spine was doing. I was closer to the floor, so less gravity working on me at this point in time, and therefore allowed my back to do a little bit less work. Most of the poses I'm going to show you are what I call awakening poses, which means they're meant to be done at the beginning of your yoga practice, and we move one breath, one movement throughout them. So the first one we're going to do is that seated bent reed. We're going to inhale our arms up into a slight back bend, pulling the sternum up to the sky. Exhale, laterally flexing over, using this hand for support and continuing to reach this arm up to the sky. This allows for a nice deep stretch down the side of the body. On my next inhale, I come back up to center and exhale over to the alternate side. And I'm just going to go back and forth slowly with my breath until I've gone to each side about 10 times to each side. So about 20 breaths total. And then from here, I'm going to switch to a rotational activity called seated spiral, in which on my exhale, I'm going to rotate to the side. And this is that independent of the pelvis rotation, so my hips are not going to come up as I move. But I'm going to exhale and rotate to the side, dropping the arms down, inhaling back up, and I'm a little bit close to the wall here, which is why I can't fully extend that back arm. And then exhale, alternate to the opposite side, allowing that rotation in my spine. Again, about 10 breaths to each side, so 20 breaths total. And then I'm going to move into an all fours position. When we come into an all fours position in yoga, we want to square the heels of our hands underneath our shoulders and our knees underneath our hips. And then when I look at the body from the side, to know that I'm in a neutral spine position, my hip, my shoulder, my ear should again be in alignment. Our head is attached to our spine, so I always want to make sure that the head follows the spine in these movements and doesn't move independently of it. But on my inhale, I'm going to move into that hyperextension, into cow pose by tipping up the crown of my head and the tip of my tailbone toward each other, opening the front side of my body, and then exhale, rotate underneath, bringing the crown of the head and the tip of the tailbone down into cat pose, moving back and forth, trying to increase the fluidity of my spine. Inhaling up into cow, exhaling under into cat. After about 10 times in each direction, I'm going to come back to that neutral spine position, and then I'm going to do an exercise sometimes called bird dog in order to help strengthen the multifidus muscles in my back. These muscles are very important for keeping the spine in alignment. So the modified version of doing bird dog is to move one limb at a time on the inhale. So you would inhale an arm reaching forward and out, exhale it back down. Inhale the opposite leg, pushing out through the heel. Exhale it back down. Inhale back to the front and down. Exhale the final leg. Inhale the final leg out and exhale it back down. If you want to do the more intermediate version, it's to inhale an opposite arm and opposite leg, keeping that spine neutral. So we don't want to lift up during this exercise. We're just trying to keep that spine neutral and then exhale back down to the same spot you lifted up from. Inhale and exhale. Other names for this pose include spinal balance and sunbird. It's very commonly used in physical therapy practices. And then the final exercise that I've been doing to help with my back and making sure that my spine moves in all directions is in the supine position. It's called supine spinal twist. It's another rotational exercise for my spine, and it's really great for feeling release in both the spine and in the mind. So I'm going to come down to a supine position, and I have two choices for how I do this pose. I can either leave my feet down on the ground, or if I'd like to get a little bit more oblique work into my back exercises here, I can bring my legs up to a tabletop. But because I'm trying to release today instead of work, I'm going to keep those feet down on the mat. I'm going to bring my arms up to a T position so that they're even with my shoulders. And while my knees and my face are both facing up, I'm going to inhale, and then I'm going to exhale, drop the knees to one side and the head to the other. I'm going to try and keep my shoulders down when I do this and my knees stacked. And then as I inhale, I bring everything back to center and exhale the opposite side. Again, for each of these exercises, I'm doing about 10 breaths to each side. So it doesn't take very long. Inhaling one part of the movement and exhaling the other part of the movement. I'd love it if you'd leave me some feedback after you give these exercises a try, and I hope that your backs are all feeling healthy and happy this afternoon. Namaste.